What happens when Hollywood's most legendary tough guy meets daytime television's most outspoken host? In just 37 seconds, Joy Behar would destroy her own credibility and shock viewers across America with an outburst so explosive that it left even her fellow co-hosts speechless. This is the exclusive inside story of what really went down when Clint Eastwood sat down for what was supposed to be a friendly chat about his latest film, but turned into the most dramatic television moment of the year. The studio lights were bright that morning as the cameras rolled on another episode of The View. The audience was buzzing with excitement knowing they were about to witness something special. Clint Eastwood, the man who had captivated audiences for decades with his steely gaze and quiet strength, walked onto the set with his trademark calm confidence. Whoopi Goldberg smiled warmly as she introduced their guest. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the one and only Clint Eastwood." The audience erupted in applause as the legendary actor took his seat at the famous round table. "Clint, it's such an honor to have you here," Whoopi said, her voice filled with genuine respect. "You've been making movies for over 50 years. What keeps you going?" Eastwood leaned back in his chair, that familiar slight smile crossing his face. "Well, Whoopi, I guess I just love telling stories. Always have. When you find something you're passionate about, age becomes just a number." Sunny Hostin nodded approvingly. "That's beautiful, and your new film deals with some really powerful themes about family and forgiveness." "That's right," Eastwood replied. "I think in today's world we've forgotten how to listen to each other, how to find common ground." The movie explores that. The conversation was flowing naturally, with Sarah Haynes asking thoughtful questions about his directing process and Alyssa Farah Griffin praising his dedication to authentic storytelling. The audience was engaged, hanging on every word from the living legend, but Joy Behar had been unusually quiet, her arms crossed, a stern expression growing on her face. The other hosts seemed to sense something brewing. Whoopi glanced at Joy with a look that seemed to say, "Please don't." "You know what I find interesting?" Joy finally spoke up, her voice cutting through the friendly atmosphere like a knife. "You talk about listening and finding common ground, but some of your past comments suggest otherwise." The studio fell silent. Eastwood raised an eyebrow but maintained his composure. "I'm sorry, Joy. What comments are you referring to?" Joy leaned forward aggressively. "Oh, don't play innocent with me. We all know where you stand politically. And frankly, I find it hypocritical that you come on here talking about unity when you've supported candidates who divide this country." The other co-hosts exchanged uncomfortable glances. Whoopi tried to step in. "Joy, maybe we should focus on the film." "No, Whoopi," Joy snapped, not taking her eyes off Eastwood. "I think our viewers deserve to know who they're really listening to." Eastwood remained perfectly calm, his voice steady. "Joy, I've always believed that Americans should be free to support whoever they choose. That's what makes this country great. I respect your right to your opinion, and I hope you can respect mine." "Respect?" Joy's voice was rising now. "How can I respect someone who—" She caught herself, but the damage was already done. The hostility was palpable. Sunny tried to redirect. "Clint, can you tell us about working with your co-stars in the new film?" But Joy wasn't finished. She had that look in her eyes that the other host knew all too well, the look that meant she was about to go too far. "Actually, I have another question," Joy interrupted, her tone dripping with disdain. "Do you think your movies glorify violence? Because frankly, I think they do. And I think that's part of the problem with this country." The audience shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the lighthearted interview they had expected. Eastwood took a deep breath, still maintaining his legendary cool. "Joy, I think if you actually watched my films, you'd see they often explore the consequences of violence. They're cautionary tales, not celebrations." "Oh, please," Joy scoffed. "You've made millions playing violent characters. Don't lecture me about consequences." Sarah Haynes looked mortified. "Joy, that's not really fair." "Fair?" Joy whirled around to face Sarah. "What's not fair is having someone on this show who represents everything wrong with toxic masculinity." The studio was dead silent now. Even the crew members looked shocked. Eastwood sat perfectly still, but something had changed in his eyes. The patient grandfather was gone, and in his place sat the man who had stared down countless villains on the silver screen. "Joy," Eastwood said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that made everyone lean in. "I came here to talk about my work and maybe share a few stories. I didn't come here to be insulted." Joy laughed bitterly. "Insulted? I'm just asking the questions that need to be asked. Unlike some people, I'm not afraid to speak truth to power." Whoopi was frantically trying to regain control. "Okay, let's take a quick break and—" "No," Eastwood said firmly, standing up from his chair. "I think I've heard enough. The moment hung in the air like a gunfighter standoff. Joy realized she had pushed too far, but her pride wouldn't let her back down. "Oh, so now you're running away?" Joy taunted. "I guess that's what tough guys do when they can't handle a real conversation." That was the moment. That was the 37 seconds that would change everything. Because what Joy Behar didn't realize was that she had just crossed a line that no one crosses with Clint Eastwood. The legendary actor turned slowly, fixing Joy with a stare that could have melted steel. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried the power of thunder. "Ma'am," he said, using the word like a weapon, "I've been in this business for over 50 years. I've worked with the best and the worst, but I have never, in all my years, encountered such unprofessional, disrespectful behavior from someone who calls themselves a journalist." Joy's mouth fell open. She had expected him to storm off or lose his temper. She hadn't expected this controlled, devastating response. "Now wait just a minute," she sputtered. But Eastwood wasn't finished. "No, ma'am, you wait. You had your chance to have a conversation. Instead, you chose to launch personal attacks. That says a lot more about you than it does about me." The other host sat frozen, watching this masterclass in dignity under pressure. The audience was completely silent, sensing they were witnessing something extraordinary. Joy's face was turning red as she realized the tables had completely turned. The woman who had spent years bulldozing over guests was now facing someone who wouldn't be intimidated by her tactics. "Don't you dare lecture me about professionalism," Joy shot back, her voice cracking slightly. "I've been doing this longer than you think." Eastwood remained standing, his presence commanding the entire studio. "Length of time doesn't excuse bad behavior, ma'am. In fact, it makes it worse." The other hosts were watching in stunned silence. Whoopi had given up trying to intervene, recognizing that this had become something bigger than a simple interview gone wrong. Sarah Haynes was staring at her hands, clearly embarrassed by her colleague's behavior. Sunny Hostin looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. Joy tried a different approach, attempting to regain her footing. "You know what, Clint? I think you're just not used to being challenged. You're used to everyone kissing up to you because you're some big movie star." A slight smile crossed Eastwood's face. Not a friendly smile, but the kind of smile that had made movie villains nervous for decades. "Is that what you think you're doing? Challenging me?" "Yes, I am," Joy declared, trying to sound confident but her voice betraying her growing desperation. "No, ma'am," Eastwood replied calmly. "Challenging someone means asking tough but fair questions. What you're doing is just being rude." The audience began to murmur. They could sense the shift happening. Joy, who had started this confrontation from a position of power as the host on her own show, was now clearly losing ground to a man who had faced down outlaws, corrupt cops, and alien invaders without breaking a sweat. Alyssa Farah Griffin finally found her voice. "Maybe we should talk about the film's message of redemption." "Oh, please," Joy interrupted, not even looking at her colleague. "Let's not pretend this is about some movie. This is about accountability." Eastwood tilted his head slightly. "Accountability? For what exactly?" Joy realized she had painted herself into a corner. She had been attacking Eastwood without any specific accusations, just general hostility. Now he was asking her to be specific, and she had nothing concrete to offer. For using your platform irresponsibly," she stammered. "My platform?" Eastwood's eyebrows raised. "Ma'am, I make movies. You have a daily television show where you share your opinions with millions of people. Who exactly has the bigger platform here?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a gunfight. Joy's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. She had just been outmaneuvered by a master. Sunny Hostin tried to throw Joy a lifeline. "I think what Joy is trying to say is that celebrities have a responsibility." "Sunny, with all due respect," Eastwood interrupted gently, "I think Joy is perfectly capable of speaking for herself, though she doesn't seem to be doing it very well right now." The audience actually gasped. It wasn't said with malice, but with a kind of quiet authority that made it devastating. Joy's face went from red to purple. "How dare you?" Joy sputtered. "This is my show." "Actually," Whoopi finally spoke up, her voice tight with embarrassment. "It's our show, Joy, and right now, you're making us all look bad." The betrayal from her own co-host hit Joy like a physical blow. She looked around the table and saw nothing but uncomfortable faces staring back at her. Even the crew members were avoiding eye contact. "I can't believe this," Joy said, her voice rising to near hysteria. "I'm trying to hold this man accountable, and you're all acting like I'm the problem." Eastwood shook his head slowly. "No, ma'am. You're not trying to hold anyone accountable. You're trying to bully someone, and you're not used to it, not working." "Bully?" Joy's voice cracked. "I am not a bully. The declaration would have been more convincing if her voice hadn't been shaking, and if she hadn't spent the last 10 minutes proving exactly the opposite. Sarah Haynes found her courage. "Joy, maybe you should apologize." "Apologize?" Joy whirled around to face Sarah. "For what? For doing my job?" Eastwood let out a small chuckle, the kind that was more sad than amused. "Ma'am, if you think this is doing your job, then I feel sorry for your viewers." That was the moment Joy completely lost it. All pretense of professionalism vanished as she stood up and pointed an accusing finger at Eastwood. "You arrogant, condescending," she began. But Eastwood held up a hand. "Stop," he said quietly, but with such authority that Joy actually did stop mid-sentence. "Just stop. You're embarrassing yourself and everyone around you." The silence that followed was deafening. Joy stood there, finger still pointed, mouth still open, but no words coming out. She looked around the table desperately, seeking support that wasn't coming. Alyssa cleared her throat uncomfortably. "Clint, I want to apologize for." "You have nothing to apologize for, young lady," Eastwood said kindly. "None of you do, except for one person, and she knows who she island." Joy finally found her voice again, but it came out as barely more than a whisper. "I was just trying to ask tough questions." "No," Eastwood replied firmly. "You were trying to create conflict where none existed. You came into this looking for a fight, and now you're upset because you picked the wrong person to fight with." Whoopi was nodding slowly, finally understanding what had really happened. "Joy, he's right. This wasn't journalism. This was just mean." The word mean hit harder than any elaborate insult could have. It was simple, honest, and completely accurate. Joy looked like she had been slapped. "I am not mean," she said weakly. Eastwood studied her for a long moment, and when he spoke, there was actually compassion in his voice. "Ma'am, I don't know you personally. Maybe you're a wonderful person when the cameras aren't rolling, but right now, in this moment, you're being mean to someone who came here as your guest. And that's not right." Joy slumped back into her chair, the fight completely drained out of her. She had started this confrontation thinking she was David facing Goliath, but it turned out she was just someone throwing stones at a man who had spent his entire career earning respect through dignity and professionalism. The studio was so quiet you could hear the cameras humming. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next, but one thing was clear. Joy Behar had just been schooled by a master, and everyone in that room knew it. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, but was really only seconds. Joy sat hunched in her chair, looking smaller than anyone had ever seen her. But as the reality of her public humiliation began to sink in, something dangerous flickered in her eyes. Pride, wounded and desperate, began to rear its ugly head. Eastwood had remained standing throughout the entire exchange, and now he moved toward his chair as if to sit back down, perhaps offering Joy a chance to save face and move forward gracefully. But Joy Behar was not a graceful woman. "You know what?" she said suddenly, her voice gaining strength from some dark place deep inside. "I don't care what anyone thinks. At least I have the courage to speak my mind." Eastwood paused, his hand on the back of his chair. "Courage and rudeness are not the same thing, ma'am." "Don't call me ma'am," Joy snapped, that familiar fire returning to her voice. "I have a name. Use it." A collective intake of breath swept through the studio. After everything that had happened, after being thoroughly outclassed and embarrassed, Joy was somehow finding the audacity to make demands. Eastwood straightened slowly, that legendary stare returning to his eyes. "I was being respectful, but if you prefer, I can call you exactly what you are." "And what's that?" Joy challenged, apparently having learned nothing from the last 20 minutes. Eastwood looked around the table at the other hosts, all of whom were staring at him with a mixture of horror and fascination. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried across the studio like thunder. "A bully who hides behind the title of journalist." Joy shot up from her chair again. "That's it. I don't have to take this from some washed-up cowboy." The words had barely left her mouth when she realized what she had just said. The other host looked physically ill. Whoopi actually put her head in her hands. The audience was so shocked that several people audibly gasped, but Eastwood just smiled. Not the cold smile from before, but something almost amused. "Washed-up cowboy?" Joy's face went white as she realized the magnitude of her mistake. She had just insulted not only one of the most beloved actors in Hollywood history, but a man who was still actively making acclaimed films well into his 90s. A man whose career had spanned longer than she had been alive. "I didn't mean," she started weakly. "Oh, you meant it," Eastwood replied calmly. "That's the first honest thing you've said since I sat down." Sarah Haynes was shaking her head in disbelief. "Joy, you can't just—" "Can't what?" Joy whirled around, her desperation now complete. Can't tell the truth? This man comes on here acting like some kind of saint, but he's just another Hollywood hypocrite. Sunny Hostin stood up abruptly. Joy, stop. Just stop talking, please. But Joy was beyond reason now. She had crossed so many lines that she couldn't find her way back. And like a cornered animal, she was lashing out at everything around her. No, I won't stop, she declared. Someone needs to say it. We sit here and pretend like these celebrities are gods, but they're not. They're just people, and some of them are terrible people who don't deserve our respect. Eastwood listened to this tirade with the patience of a man who had seen everything the world had to offer. When Joy finally ran out of steam, he nodded thoughtfully. You're absolutely right about one thing, he said quietly. Celebrities are just people. Some good, some bad, most somewhere in between. But you know what separates the good ones from the bad ones? Joy stared at him, trapped by her own curiosity. How they treat people who can't fight back, Eastwood continued. How they behave when they think nobody important is watching. How they handle themselves when things don't go their way. The words hit Joy like physical blows. Every sentence was a mirror held up to her own behavior, not just today, but throughout her career. And you, Eastwood said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute moral authority, have failed on every single count. Joy's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. She looked around the table desperately, seeking some kind of support or rescue, but found only embarrassed faces and averted eyes. Whoopi finally found her voice. Clint, I am so sorry about this. This is not how we normally conduct interviews. I know it's not, Whoopi, Eastwood replied kindly. You ladies have always been professional with me in the past. This is just one person's problem, not the whole show's. The distinction was clear and devastating. He wasn't condemning The View or its other hosts. He was isolating Joy as the sole source of the problem, and everyone in the studio knew it. Joy made one last desperate attempt to regain control. Fine, if that's how you feel, then maybe you should just leave. The suggestion hung in the air like a challenge. Everyone waited to see how Eastwood would respond. He looked at Joy for a long moment, then at the other hosts, then at the audience. When he spoke, his voice was calm and final. You know what? I think I will. He began removing his microphone with the same deliberate care he had shown throughout the entire ordeal. No angry gestures, no storming off, just a dignified man making a dignified exit. Ladies, he said to Whoopi, Sarah, Sunny, and Alyssa, it's been a pleasure meeting you. I'm sorry we couldn't have a proper conversation about the film. Then he turned to Joy one last time. And as for you, I hope someday you learn the difference between being provocative and being cruel. With that, Clint Eastwood walked off The View, set with the same quiet confidence he had walked onto it. But behind him, he left chaos. Joy sat alone at the table, abandoned by her colleagues and despised by the audience. Finally understanding the true cost of her behavior, Whoopi tried desperately to salvage something from the wreckage. We'll be right back after this commercial break. But as the cameras stopped rolling, everyone in that studio knew that some things couldn't be fixed with a commercial break. Joy Behar had just destroyed her own credibility in front of millions of viewers, all because she couldn't resist picking a fight with a man who had spent 70 years earning respect through grace under pressure. The washed-up cowboy had ridden off into the sunset, leaving behind a broken bully who finally understood that some people fight back not with anger or volume, but with something far more powerful, dignity. And in that moment, everyone watching understood why Clint Eastwood had become a legend and why Joy Behar had just become a cautionary tale.